everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today we're going to be talking about the war in the Pacific in World War II. Japan dominating, tide gets turned. Japan has to go to suicide bombers called Kamikazes. America freaks out and has to ask for help from our frenemy at the time, Russia. Alright, cool stuff to talk about. Let's get started. So teaching World War II is pretty complicated because you basically have two wars taking place at the same time. The European theater, which we have been talking about with Eisenhower and Patton and Omar Bradley. And yesterday we got into VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. Today we're going to talk about the Pacific. But it wasn't like they fought in Europe, won in Europe, and then America and the Allies are going to focus on the Pacific. Both of these wars are going on simultaneously. As to not confuse you, it's easier to teach them independently. So talk about the war in Europe, Hitler's dead, is 1945, where we got to yesterday. Well, now we need to talk about the Pacific. So we got to go back in time, boop, 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 come all the way back to 1941, the attack at Pearl Harbor. FDR, he's back alive. Truman's back to being the vice president. Pull FDR out of his coffin. And back in his wheelchair, FDR is in charge. We're back to December 7th, 1941. We've been attacked at Pearl Harbor. So here's what happens in the Pacific. Immediately after the attack at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese, they're not trying to take over America. They're trying to get all the natural resources that they can. Their goal is to take over Asia and have complete and total influence in Asia. So Japan turns around after annihilating the American naval forces at Pearl Harbor and go to the Philippines. The Philippines are where America was getting the oil from that we were selling to Japan. Japan's just going to cut out the middleman, America, and take over the Philippines themselves. And that is why they had to get rid of the United States military, so we couldn't stop them from doing that. When Japan gets to the Philippines, because it was a American naval base as well, massive battle takes place. But the American forces there were wildly outnumbered, not well prepared, which a lot of criticism on that history of like how ill-prepared the American forces could have possibly been there in the Philippines at the time. So the problem is that as the Philippines are getting taken over, any American soldiers there are becoming prisoners of war because now a war has officially happened between Japan and America. So the problem with that is there is a specific general that is there in the Philippines, a man named Douglas MacArthur. Now, Douglas MacArthur, the best way to describing him, you got a cranky granddad somewhere who just is really grumpy and is kind of unlikable, but they know what they're doing. They're a competent person. That's pretty much Douglas MacArthur. So Douglas MacArthur is willing to fight to the death here in the Philippines. That's where he is stationed at. FDR and George Marshall, which is the Army Chief of Staff under FDR, knows they're going to need MacArthur for this war, so they have to get him out because he's not replaceable. They need his leadership abilities. So they send in a special forces group to get him out, and he's like, I refuse to leave because, it is just absolute annihilation taking place in the Philippines. And they're like, no, we need to get you out. He's like, I refuse to leave without my men. And they're like, yeah, if you don't leave with us, we're authorized shoot you in the kneecaps and drag you away. You're coming with us one way or other. The president said you have to leave. And he's like, okay. But he makes a famous statement here when he is leaving the Philippines. He says, I came out of Bataan, which is part of the Philippines where they're stationed at. And he said, I shall return. A kind of a famous statement that Douglas MacArthur says. So he has to flee the Philippines right as it collapses, and it is completely taken over by Japan. So Japan really just taking over everything they want, and there's nobody to stop them because they have taken out the United States Navy here at Pearl Harbor. Luckily, the American naval forces, or the American aircraft carriers, are still intact, which is going to play a huge part here. But the question here is, why did the Japanese want the Philippines? So that's the question. Pause me if you need to. Answer that completely, and we'll move on. So as the war progresses and America gets our battleships back up and running, we get new ones. Aircraft carriers hard to replace. Battleships, not easy to do, but more possible to do. So America gets our Navy up and running. Where now it is time to go stop the expansion of Japan. Just like when Hitler gets stopped his expansion at Stalingrad, moving into Russia. Before you can defeat somebody, you have to stop them from expanding. Well, Japan wants to expand even further than where they currently are. Japan wants Australia. Australia has some natural resources, has a lot of benefits of what they want, deep water ports. So Australia is actually, if you're looking at this map here, is relatively, by comparison to America, is much closer to Asia and Japan than it is to North America. So Japan is going to roll their army down to take over Australia. We'll simplify it and just say they're going to take over Australia. Australia, they're a pretty legit military themselves, not to the same standard of America and Japan and England as far as Navy goes, but it's legit. So America rolls in here to Australia, teams up with the Australian Navy to defend Australia from the incoming Japanese Navy. Now, nobody has ever actually fought the Japanese Navy because they're just so dominant. So America and Australia looking at each other like, yeah, man, we got this. We got this. Japan, they don't want to show up. And then all of a sudden, Japan shows up. And the entire horizon turns black with this massive navy that Japan has. Japan absolutely outnumbers the combined navy of America and Australia. And America and Australia is like, ruh-roh, like, this can't be good. They're at a place called Coral Sea. It's amazing how small things change the course of history. Weather changes the course of history right here. Right before this battle takes place, which would absolutely have annihilated the United States Navy, would have annihilated the Australian Navy. Right before this battle takes place, a very thick fog comes rolling in and blocks, really they can't see each other. So you can't really fight when this fog has surrounded everybody's navy. So what's interesting here in Coral Sea is aircraft carriers are here. This is the first major aircraft carrier battle that's going to take place. Because your aircraft carriers are pretty much not replaceable, all right, because they take so long to build. So because it's a pea soup fog, people are, little fighter jets are taking off one at a time to kind of fly up above the fog, see what's happening, and then land back on the aircraft carrier, which the level of technology they had in the 1940s on these little fighter jets trying to land it, because you're landing blind, you're in the middle of the fog. You can fly up above the fog and see stuff, but landing, you just have coordinates like, you're hoping your coordinates are wrong, you're just slamming into the water or the side of a ship. Hopefully the ship didn't move when you took off. Anyway, so by pure luck, one of these scout planes trying to see basically when the fog will lift, sees an opening over on the side, and I believe it's an American, and flies over this opening and sees there are multiple Japanese aircraft carriers in that opening because they don't want to take off in the fog. And he's like, ooh, like writes down the coordinates, flies back to his aircraft carrier, and a bunch of allies take off their fighter jets from the American aircraft carrier, fly over to the Japanese aircraft carrier, and are able to annihilate multiple Japanese aircraft carriers here at Coral Sea. The fog does lift. The battle ensues because it's vicious fighting. The Allies actually lose more ships than Japan. And it kind of haymaker blows back and forth. But by the fact that the Allies got the first attack and Japan caught them off balance, Japan leaves and goes back to Japan with their navy. Even though the Allies ended up having lost more ships, this is the first time Japan wasn't able to take over something they set out to take over, which was Australia. And because of that, this really does feel like a victory, even though it was brutal. And it's also, this is a painting of the Battle of Coral Sea. Not a lot of pictures since it was very foggy. The Battle of Coral Sea is the first battle in the history of the world in which not a single ship fired at another ship. It was all planes from aircraft carriers attacking the ships of the enemy. This really sets the tone that there is a new way of fighting in the ocean. So the Battle of Coral Sea, first time Japan got stopped from taking something over. And then the Battle of Midway. So the Battle of Midway is crazy. And it is the turning point of the war. So Midway is an island, spoiler alert, midway between Japan, China, Asia, and the United States, right? And it's called Midway. Both sides want to take over this itty bit. It's not even, you can't even see it on this map here because it's so small. So it's just right here in the middle, Midway. Both sides want this island basically as a staging area to attack the other one, all right? So Japan, again, they're not trying to invade America, but they need this for a defensive front. They need this island. It's an island in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing there, but because of the technology at the time, without getting too much into detail, you need a landmass to help you refuel ships and get staging and multiple other things. Having an island is incredibly important to battle plans for both sides. Both sides discover this island at the same time, or at least decide they both want it at the same time, and they both race towards it. Now, Japan still vastly outnumbers the American Navy. America, and it's kind of crazy how this works out, because it seems kind of messed up. America gets there first and sets up shop on the island, knowing, because we had already broken the Japanese code, knowing Japan is coming in. Japan rolls up on the island, sees that America is already there, and the American Navy retreats and flees and runs away. All right? So, when the American Navy flees and runs away, Japan's like, all right, Midway's going to be ours. We just have to take care of the people that are here on this island because they got left. And the troops that are like setting up stuff on Midway are like, whoa, Navy, where are y'all going? And it feels like the American soldiers got abandoned on Midway. And they pretty much did. So Japan had showed up expecting a naval battle. So they have all these planes like this that is on their aircraft carriers ready to take off and have a naval battle. Well, you got to know before the battle starts if it's going to be a naval battle or a battle on land. Because these planes, while they have machine guns, the bomb on this plane right here is a torpedo, which means you drop it into the water next to a ship, and it putters in and hits the ship from the side. All right, and you got to know whether you're going to fight a ship or land, because if you just drop this thing on land, it doesn't explode. All right, it doesn't explode on impact. Not designed to do that. It is designed to hit the water, kind of float. A little propeller comes on and hits the ship from the side. Well, this is what all the planes had on them because they're expecting to fight the United States military. Well, the United States military, their Navy has abandoned them, so they're like, fine. So they switch out all of these bombs to these type of bombs. These are the ones that you drop, and when it hits land, it explodes immediately. All right, because now you're going to attack Midway. And this is what happens. Japan switches out all of their bombs to these that explode on impact and take off and take over Midway and bomb Midway, annihilating all the troops that are at Midway that were abandoned by the United States military that left them there. And you're like, whoa, what? Why would that happen? I mean, I can't justify it because, you want to say everything, but America planned this to happen. Because as soon as this attack happens, and these men are getting annihilated on the Midway, and they do, the United States military and the Navy comes roaring back into the battle. The reason this is important is because you have to find where the aircraft carriers are of the other side. They're hundreds of miles away. You don't know where they are. If you can take out the other side's aircraft carriers, you can wipe out their Navy. How do you find their aircraft carriers? This is part of America's strategy. Because now it's a battle against ships. All these planes here, you can't use these bombs against ships. You have to have torpedoes. So all of these planes that have this bomb on it that are at Midway have to race back to the aircraft carrier to get this put on them. When that happens, America finds all the Japanese aircraft carriers. We just followed them back to their aircraft carriers. And we absolutely annihilated the Japanese military here at Midway. And it is a crushing defeat for Japan's Navy and a massive victory for the United States. And it is a huge turning point in the war because now the United States military, the United States Navy, is now stronger than Japan. Than Japan's. So Chester Nimitz, this is the admiral for the United States Navy. He is responsible for all this at Midway. It's a very risky maneuver, literally sacrificing American soldiers for the greater good. Decisions I'm not adult enough to ever make. A lot of ethical questions on, do you sacrifice 5 people to save 100? All right, a lot of those style questions take place here at Midway, but Midway is a turning point of the war, and that's what the question here is. Why was the Battle of Midway such a turning point in World War II? All right, so answer that completely. Pause me. We're moving on. So Kamikazes. This is mind-blowing at the time. It's still crazy to talk about, but Kamikazes, the term means divine wind. These are suicide planes that Japan turns to after Midway to attack the American military. Here's why. Let me start out and explain one part about this. If you've ever heard of kamikazes, if you haven't, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. All the kamikaze pilots are volunteers. Nobody's required to do this. There's actually so many kamikaze pilots that there's a lot who were signed up to be a kamikaze pilot they weren't able to use by the end of the war. Like, they had more volunteers than they could even use in this, because the idea is you're fighting for your homeland. Will you sacrifice yourself for the homeland? And there were tons of Japanese pilots that had signed up to be a kamikaze. So here's why. There's a couple of things here. Number one, because Japan didn't have any more aircraft carriers that were effective, and the United States did, they didn't really have a way of stopping the American aircraft carriers. Because you take out aircraft carriers with planes. Well, if you don't have an aircraft carrier of your own that can get your planes close enough to their aircraft carrier, because these little fighter jets only have a travel radius of a couple hundred miles before they have to land and refuel. That's why they have to come off the aircraft carriers. Now, a bomber, a big old bomber, all right, they're pretty much ineffective in war anyway, because you can't fly over a battleship that's like a mile below you and just drop all your bombs and like expect it to hit something. You're never going to hit anything. So Japan realizes to stop the attack, the movement forward of these aircraft carriers, you take a bomber filled with bombs, you fly it out into the ocean, you find the aircraft carrier, and you don't drop your bombs on it, you just slam into it. You fly way up high, and this is you fly way up high where they can't shoot you. You find the aircraft carrier, and you come straight down the top. You are a guided missile filled with bombs in an attempt to take out battleships and aircraft carriers. Yes, you die as the pilot, but they were all volunteers willing to die for their country. Present day, with the terrorism and the other stuff, the idea of a suicide bomber, crazily, is like more well known. Nobody had ever seen this in World War II. How are you going to defeat somebody that is willing to kill themselves? It really freaks out the American soldiers, and is actually devastatingly effective against multiple aircraft carriers. This is a picture of a direct hit from a kamikaze pilot. This aircraft carrier will sink. This is the same from the other side. This is the aircraft carrier slowly. So you can see all the men on top that will be getting in lifeboats and going to another ship. So the ones that are on top survived, but a lot of people died on this impact. And nobody has ever fought a enemy that is willing to kill themselves. So this really freaks out the American soldiers as they get closer to Japan, because if they're willing to die out here in the middle of the Pacific, what happens when America is forced to invade Japan? It's also interesting, when we were in Europe at this time, England's helping us, France is, all these countries want to help us. Here in the Pacific, America's just kind of out here by ourselves. We don't have all this help that exists in Europe. So I got a picture, a video here of kamikazes. This is crazy. Whoever's job is hey, go grab the video camera and go record this. Holy crap. Kamikazes really made America realize we don't know if we can do this ourselves. So the question here is, why were the Japanese forced to rely on suicide bombers? Like, what had changed that required them to have to rely on this new battle strategy? So answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right. This is really, really important for a variety of reasons. For all of World War II, for what's going to happen up to present day tensions. We're going to kind of merge here, because we've been talking about the war in Pacific today. Yesterday we talked about war in Europe. The two sides are going to meet here for a meeting. All right, this is February of 1945. FDR, he is going to die about a month after this. This is the last meeting FDR will have, international meeting before he's going to pass away. So he's really struggling. He's very sick here. This is it's the Yalta Conference. It takes place at Yalta. This is a famous picture that comes out of it. They call themselves the Big Three. You got Winston Churchill on the left, all right? You got FDR here in the middle, and Stalin here on the right. Let's point out how much respect FDR has. He got Stalin to sit down for a picture, all right? Because remember, FDR, he's in a wheelchair, so they're never pictured with him being in a wheelchair because they don't want him to look weak. So FDR is always going to be sitting down. So the war in Europe is wrapping up. The Battle of the Bulge is ending. It's obvious that Hitler is going to collapse. Hitler's still alive at this point, but his days are clearly numbered. And so because Stalin and FDR and these countries have had beef, especially Stalin and everybody else in the Allies, had beef in the past. They wanted to get together and have a meeting about, hey, when this war ends here in Europe, all these countries, remember that Hitler took over, and then we're all showing up and we're liberating these countries? What's the game plan when this war ends? Are we letting these countries go back to being their own countries? What's going to happen? The big reason here is we know Stalin, he wants to basically own everything. So all these countries he liberates from Germany, is he really going to give them back? So everybody wants to meet at Yalta, so we're all on the same page and nothing catches anybody off guard, and we can try to be adults about this. So at Yalta, the question ends up being, what are we going to do with Germany when the war ends? All right. Well, Stalin, all the different colors here on the map, that is all Germany as a whole. Stalin says, I want to cut it up. I want to have a piece of Germany. Now keep in mind, Stalin hates Germany with an absolute vicious passion. So the fact that Stalin wants to own part of Germany has got to be very concerning to the rest of the Allies, because they're like, what are you going to do to them if you own them? So Stalin's like, I would like to divide up Germany. I would like to keep Germany. Also, the other countries that I'm liberating, I'm going to own those. Obviously, on any normal day of the week, everybody's going to say no to this. And this is Winston Churchill at Yalta. I imagine this is Winston Churchill going, no, Stalin, you're a psychopath. We're not letting you have all this stuff. That's what I imagine he's laughing about here. I'm sure it's not. Somebody probably made a fart joke or something. I don't know. Stalin smiling, it probably had to be really messed up, because I imagine it takes a lot to get Stalin to smile. Anyway, Winston Churchill's like, absolutely, we're not giving you anything, Stalin. Ain't that right, America? And FDR, who's here, No, this is another famous picture from Yalta. He's like, Winston Churchill, you go play over there. I'm going to need to talk here to Stalin. And Winston Churchill's like, oh, what are you doing? And Winston Churchill's like, dude, there are some issues taking place. We need to talk. So Winston Churchill's grumpy about this, but basically whichever way FDR goes, because it's 2 out of 3. So he looks at Stalin, and Stalin is like, ooh, you didn't just give me a hardcore no on this. Well, FDR looks at Stalin and says, all right, there's a couple rules here with what you're asking. You want to divide up Germany and all that. Okay. And Stalin's like, for real? All right. But FDR here, all right, now he's about a month away from dying anyway. He got polio a second time. Let the man smoke a cigarette. He's like, all right, but there's some stipulations here. I need something from you, Russia. All right. Because the Kamikazes are taking place now in the Pacific. So that war is not going well in the Pacific. In Europe, it's clear it's about over. The Pacific not going well. FDR says, I need your help, Stalin. I need you to invade Russia, or I need you to invade Japan and help us out, America. I don't think we can do it without you. Stalin's like, gets quiet. He's like, Now, the reason that we have to ask Russia is because even though nuclear weapons, which we're going to talk about in the next lesson, those aren't developed yet. We basically develop and then immediately use them, like instantaneously. At this point, there's no nukes, so there's no other option here. We just have to have help. It could be 1 million troops get killed if we invade Japan. 1 million. So we need all the help that we can get. So not only do we want Stalin to help us, all right, that's kind of a bargaining chip here of why we're letting him have part of Germany. We also want him to join this new group that's going to come out that's going to be really important in this course up to present day, called the United Nations, which all the countries on Earth are supposed to get together and talk things out so it doesn't lead to World War III. And we need, if Russia refuses to join it, because Russia doesn't like to join things, if Russia refuses to join it, it's kind of a moot point. So we're like, we want you to join the United Nations, all right, in addition to, and Stalin, we want you to promise that all these countries that we're going to let you have, Czechoslovakia, Poland, all these, that you're going to let them have free elections and choose if they want to be owned by you. Stalin at Yalta promises he will allow all these countries that he is allowed to own after World War II choose whether or not they want to be owned by him. All right. With this agreement at Yalta, Stalin agrees. Okay, once Hitler is defeated, 6 months after that, I will help you invade Japan. At this point, or historically speaking, that would have been November 1945 that Stalin has promised America to help our land invasion of Japan. So the question here is, what was agreed to at the Yalta Conference? So answer that completely, and I will see you guys tomorrow.